the effort. I like to share with parents what their students are doing because sometimes it's happened once or twice that teenagers don't always express what they're learning in school, and parents want to know, like myself, for example, I'd love to know what my kids are doing. And so this is from, thank you, Aaron. This is a piece from this unit. You can see this slide about how to speak to teenagers about God as a class I gave last year in someone's home. And it really is a reflection of my introduction to my philosophy class. And the particular topic we're doing today is just one topic from amongst these. So the one we're doing today is, how do I know when something is true? How can I tell if something is true? Okay, ready to roll. So many times I find that you can have, as a teacher of religious teacher, you'll have different people, different students looking at the exact same evidence, and they'll come up with totally different conclusions. So most classes in Jewish philosophy will, hi, welcome, no problem. Most classes will talk about creation as far as design in the world, right? There's so much design in the world, and let's look at the human anatomy, and let's look at the animal world, and let's look at the plant world, and there's so many miracles that happen all the time, and yet most people will look at that and be completely unimpressed. So you have some people looking at this saying, amazing, this points to a designer, and then you have some people looking at the same evidence, or the majority of people in the world see the same evidence every single day, and they're completely unimpressed. So I want to show you a little clip that I took off a larger video. And so let's listen to two teenagers in college being interviewed.
Because everything we see around us, everything we need to live, everything we need to survive and be happy is all around us. We don't want for anything, all our food, our air, everything to make us happy and for us to survive is here. So there had to be an originator of this. It couldn't have just happened by chance.
So they're interviewing different college students about what they think about design in the world, and this student says, we don't want for anything, we have everything we need. That's called the anthropic principle, which means that if you look around this world, it seems like it was built for humans. There had to be a creator. Then we take another student. Let's see what he says.
Just because the fact that I haven't seen any, proof or, concrete evidence of that, and until somebody shows me.
So I haven't seen this. I took little cuts, and he says, I haven't seen any proof of a creator until someone shows me evidence. And the other guy's saying, what are you talking about? The evidence is all around you. Just look at yourself, look at your anatomy. Now, as somebody who teaches a wide array of students, it behooves me to do the following, to ask exactly where's the block? Why are two different people looking at the same evidence and coming up with different conclusions? And if I'm teaching a religious class, which is what it is, it's Jewish philosophy, I'm teaching a class about creation and about a creator, then how do I reach everyone? How do I reach people exactly? So, something that the Talmud will do often is when there's a debate, and the Talmud is full of debate from beginning to end. Jews love arguing with each other. Something that the Talmud will often do is say, let's get to the real source of this debate. This person takes this position, and this person takes that position. What is the cause? What is the initial source that they're thinking differently? Why are they thinking differently? And when it comes to this specific case, when we're looking at the world, and you have two people looking at the same evidence, one says, I've seen zero evidence, and the other person saying, the evidence is all around us, the core source of why they're seeing things differently seems to be because they have two different standards of proof. So according to the first guy that we saw, he thinks everything's proven. Look at all the design around me, right? The fact that my brain is able to retrieve information within a second and produce the fight or flight experience, and my pupils dilate, and my body starts sweating, and my adrenaline starts pumping, all within a split second because it's able to think about, that sound is a dangerous sound because I heard it 15 years ago. Amazing, there's a designer here. Because that's enough proof for this guy. But for this one, he obviously has a much stricter standard of proof. Things haven't been proven to him yet. So if that's the case, if that's really where the basis for the two ways of looking things are, then as a teacher with 20 kids in a class who all see things in a different light and have different standards going in their mind, how do I teach anything? At what point is something called proven? And just because I think something's called proven just doesn't mean that they think something's called proven. So in the olden days, before I developed this, I thought I would prove something till I'm blue in the face. Wow, look at all the design, etc. And people would be unimpressed. And I'd be like, I don't see that. Because we're not using the same standard. So how do I address this? What do I do about this? And now I'm coming from a religious perspective, from a religious class. But the same thing applies in many different classes. So how are you supposed to teach and arrive, how are we supposed to have a standard of proof that is unanimous to everyone? What does Hashem expect from us? What does Hashem expect from us when we look at this world? At what point is something called proven? At what point is something called true? That's what we're going to try to address today. So there are different standards of proof out there. People use different standards. So one standard, for example, let's take some extremes. An extreme standard is there's some people who believe in something called negative proof. Negative proof is people say everything is proven, I automatically believe anything I hear unless I see otherwise, unless I have evidence otherwise. Okay? And then I'll ask my students to go into the world of politics and go find me an example of somebody who says that. I think something's true until you must disprove it. It's not so hard to find. There are people who believe in something called negative proof. Then we all know that there's the scientific way of proving things, which is you have a hypothesis, and then you do an experiment and an observation, and you reach a conclusion, right? Now I'm going to go, there's another extreme. There's another extreme of proving things. Negative proof was extreme gullibility. Totally gullible, I believe everything. On the other side of the spectrum is something called Descartesianism. René Descartes, who was mostly kids know him from their math class, from the Cartesian planes, the x and their y interslopes, right? Same guy. René Descartes believed that you cannot prove anything. You can't prove anything to me because he will always find a fluke possibility to say that it's not true. And I'll show you his writings in a moment. So for example, if I tell you that my sweater is black, a Cartesian, René Descartes, would say, well, not necessarily. First of all, maybe I'm dreaming right now, and it's not really black. Second of all, maybe a Martian is programming my brain right now to think that it's black, and really it's pink. Maybe I'm delusional right now. Maybe I'm not completely sober right now. I could come up with 1,000 different reasons why I could find a fluke possibility that my senses are deceiving me. And therefore, I buy nothing. Nothing, absolutely nothing is proven to him. So, let me just show you some of his writings. I mean, to go through all of them would take a long time, but I'll just show you a little snippet. The red is the synopsis of what he actually says, and the black is just summaries. But here's one of his quotes. All that up to the present time I have accepted as most true and certain I have learned either from the senses or through the senses. But it is sometimes proved to me that the senses are deceptive, right? We've all had that moments where I think that's my daughter, I think that's my wife, and then I find out it's somebody else. We've all been deceived by our senses at some point or another. It is wiser not to trust entirely to anything to which we have once been deceived. So he throws it all out. So if you keep reading him, he basically, the reason he comes up with this idea that you can't prove anything is because he says we all have dreams which are extremely vivid. We've had very, very vivid dreams. And then we've all had moments of reality when we're awake, but we've actually been deceived and we thought something was true and it wasn't. He says the line between a very vivid dream and reality is so small that there's basically no difference between them. So therefore, according to him, there really is, you can never prove anything is real. You can't prove anything's real. Now, I ask you the question, are there a lot of these people out there or very few of these people out there? Very few, you would think, right? Very few people think like that. They say that's outrageous. You can't prove anything. Well, I think there's a lot of them out there. And the reason I say that is because, let's take an example, again, from a religious class. I show students the probabilities of a human brain with all its functions coming about randomly. That means not being designed. Just random forces. What are the chances that a human brain could come about by itself? I'm not talking about a cell. I'm not talking about a piece of the cell. I'm not talking about an amino acid. I'm talking about not protein, a full brain. The chances are 1 over 10 to the 250 trillionth power. Now, let me just explain what that number is. As we all know exponents over here, and immediately, you get very quickly into the millions, and then into the billions, and then the trillions. It goes very, very fast. But let's give a little illustration to understand what that number is. The chance, if I named every single atom in this planet, that means this atom is Johnny, and this atom is Susie. Give every single atom a name, okay? Talking about atoms now. The chances of me randomly, in one try, plucking the atom that's called Fred, so I'm going to pluck Fred, okay? Me getting it right is only 1 over 10 to the 80th power. Because you're in such an enormously large number, 10 to the 80th power, it's only 1 over 10 to the 80th power. And all of this, I have the statistics, I have the papers. The chances of the human brain coming about without somebody designing it is 1 over 10 to the 250 trillionth power. Is the same thing as winning the Powerball lottery every single week for the next few 100 million years. And yet, you'll have many people who will say, well, I'm not impressed. And why am I not impressed when I look at the human brain? Because I'm going to go with the fluke possibility that if you give enough time, everything could have happened on its own. It's possible it happened on its own. And therefore, I'm not convinced. So there's actually, in my class, there's a lot of people who look at things with trying to pick on a fluke possibility instead of what's certainly more probable. A lot of people out there like that. Now, if that's true, how do I talk to them? Now, I'm not out to cram anything down anyone's throat, but I'm out to, let's at least talk in the same language. We need a common standard of proof. If we don't have a common standard, then we're not speaking the same language. For example, my brother, who lives in Israel, called me to tell me he had a baby one time. And I'm like, great, Mazel Tov, how's the wife doing, how's everyone doing, how much does the baby weigh? The baby weighs 2.2. Now I'm thinking in pounds, and he's talking in kilo, and I'm like, is this baby being incubated? What's going on over here? So we have to be talking the same language. If we don't have the same standard of proof, we're looking at the same evidence, and you're saying it's proven, and I'm saying it's not proven, or vice versa. So how do I talk to a Cartesian? If I have a Cartesian in my class, and there's many of them, so we're not sharing the same standard. So let's talk about which standard makes sense, which standard don't make sense. So the negative standard, when it comes to the negative standard that we spoke about, obviously you're not actively proving anything. So we could dispose of the negative standard right away. But let's talk about now the scientific standard, right? You go through, you do an experiment, and you have an hypothesis, you make an experiment, you observe, and then you come up with a conclusion. Well, many people will say, we're not going to agree on that either, because you say you've observed something, but the Cartesian is going to say you've observed nothing. I don't care what you've observed. I'm going to pick on the fluke to say you haven't seen what you've seen. This is an extreme, but between the extreme and there's many different people who have different standards. So the scientific is not going to satisfy a Cartesian either. What do I tell somebody who thinks like this? What do I do? So I'll tell you what I do. I tell them, let me ask you a question. When Descartes wanted to cross the street, let's say he wants to cross Sterling Road, and cars are coming at 50 miles an hour. Does he say the car's not here right now, and I can't prove it? Can't prove that the car is here. And maybe I'm dreaming right now, and maybe my senses are deceiving me, and somebody's programming my brain, and I'm not even thinking straight. Well, 99 out of 100 will never say that. They're not crossing the street when the car is coming. And when Descartes wants to go to Burger King, or whatever they had in France in those days, okay, and he wants to order a burger, and somebody behind the counter tells him, I'm sorry, but I've read your works, and I don't even think you're here right now. So I'm not even giving you a burger because you're not here right now. Would he say, okay, that's totally cool, I respect that? I don't think so. So the vast majority of people who say they think like this do not consistently think like this. They only think like that in some areas of their life when they wish to. Now, what's the difference why when most Descartesians want to cross the street, they're going to say, the car's there, I'm not going, I'm not crossing the street. But when it comes to looking at the world, they'll say, fluke, it's possible if you give enough time, and right, anything could possibly happen, we could go with the fluke. What's the difference? Why on the one hand, they're not going to cross the street, but on the other hand, when it comes to looking at the world, they're going to look at it differently? What is the difference which makes them look at things differently in those two cases?
Consequences.
The risk.
The risk, the consequences. In other words, it's their bias telling them that when it's beneficial to me, I'm going to look at things one way. And when it's not beneficial to me, then I'm going to look at things in another way. And so obviously getting hit by a car is not beneficial to me. All of a sudden they have a new standard. I'm going to look at the things in the most probable way, not in the most fluky way. I'm going to look at things in the most probable way. But when it comes to looking at the world, all of a sudden I'm looking at things in the most fluky way. Because there's a big bias when it comes to looking at the world. Because if you say that there's a creator to this world, along with that comes accountability. Because if there's a creator to this world, that means God had a purpose for us. And if he had purpose for us, it means I can't just sit back and play video games my entire life. That means I have something that I'm expected to do and I have accountability. And therefore there's an enormous bias, which is like a freight train, which is pushing me to see things differently. So if I'm showing you that the Descartesian standard is not really logical, because people don't think like that, so what is the Judaic standard? At what point does Hashem expect us to look at things? How does Hashem expect us to look at things and know when something is true or not? So let's go to a story, which most of us know, but I'll give a little background in case some of us don't. So this is the story of Joseph and his brothers. Joseph was hated by his brothers. They accused him of things. They thought whatever they thought, and therefore they decided to get rid of him. So they throw him in a pit, and he's rescued from the pit, and eventually he's sold into Egypt, into slavery. He's a slave in Egypt. And he does not see his brothers for 22 years. His brothers do not know that he's alive. Let alone, while in Egypt, he became the second in command to the king, the viceroy. They would have never expected such a thing could be. So, all right, the brothers, Joseph's 11 brothers, have to buy food. There's a famine in Canaan, which is ancient Israel. They have to buy food. So there's famine in Canaan, they got to go down to Egypt. Egypt is where there's food. So they go to Egypt to buy the food, and they have no idea that the person in charge of food storage in Egypt is Joseph, is their brother. They have no idea. And Joseph wants to test their commitment to their brothers now. So he tells them, I want to see if you've repented. So he tells them, without letting on that he's Joseph, he says, you know what, if you want to get, I'm going to give you food now, but I want to make sure that you're not spies. I think I'm going to accuse you of being spies. To prove to me you're not spies, you told me you have a little brother at home named Benjamin. Bring him down here. And the brother's like, no, we can't do that. Please, my dad's going to have a heart attack. Can't do that. And he says, I'm sorry, that's the only way, and I'm holding one of your brothers in jail until you get him. So he takes one brother, Shimon, he throws him in jail, and he says, bring down Benjamin, or he stays here. They go, they bring down Benjamin. And then, what does he do? He falsely accuses Benjamin of stealing his goblet, what do you call a goblet in English? His cup, okay? He puts the cup, he plants it inside Benjamin's bag. Again, he's testing the brothers to see their camaraderie. He plants it in his bag. He has one of his people open it up. He says, I'm holding Benjamin in prison. And then the brothers go ballistic. Yehuda especially, Yehuda goes ballistic. He says, listen, you asked us to come down, you asked for food, you accused us of being spies, none of it was true. Now, we brought down Benjamin, now you want to keep him, please. What are you doing? And the verse tells us, at this final climax moment when Joseph is about to reveal himself, he says the following. He wept out loud. He wept out loud, so the Egyptians heard and the house of Pharaoh heard. And Joseph said to his brothers, I am Joseph. Is my father still alive? His brothers could not answer him because they were startled before him. They had nothing to say. They were in shock. There was nothing to respond to at that moment. Now, the rabbis focus on this verse, and they say there's a message here for us. We're all going to have a moment like this. What do they say? So here's the Hebrew, but I'll skip the Hebrew, I'll go right to the English. So this is from the rabbinic writings in the Midrash. It says, Joseph's brothers couldn't answer him because they were startled before him. That's the verse. The rabbis say, you know what we should learn from that? Woe to the day of judgment, woe to the day of rebuke. That means a person should be danger on our day of judgment. Joseph was the youngest of the brothers. The youngest is the least respectable. He's from the youngest of the brothers. And the older ones couldn't answer him. They had nothing to say to him. You're right. You told us off. You're right. Each person will also have a day of judgment and rebuke. That means when our time comes and we face Hashem at the end of our lives, we're also going to have a time of judgment. Will we be able to answer? Will we have what to say? Or will we also be silent at that moment? That's the rabbinical statement. I have a question. Did you see any rebuke in that sentence? Woe to the day of judgment. Just like the brothers couldn't answer Joseph, we also will have an accounting one day. Will we also be startled and not be able to answer? Just like Joseph, woe to our day of judgment, woe to our day of rebuke. Where's the rebuke? I didn't see. All he said was, "Hi, I'm Joseph. Is Dad still alive?" That's all he said. There's no rebuke over there. And furthermore, what is the difference between judgment and rebuke? What's the difference between those two words? So I'm going to change two things around. I'm going to change the cadence of my voice, and I'm going to give you some context. Those are the only two things I'm going to change. And then you're going to see exactly where the rebuke is. Let's go backwards to when the brothers were pleading before Joseph, don't keep Benjamin in prison. What's going to happen? If the boy is gone, our father is going to be in grief to the grave. He's going to die of grief. If I don't bring him to you, I will have sinned against my father forever. I told Dad I have to bring him back. How can I sin to my father? How will I go up to my father over and over and over again? Their mom was dead at this point. But how can I go back to my father? Father, father, think about our father, our father, our father, our father. And Joseph said to his brothers, I'm Joseph. Think what you did to me. Is Dad still alive? There's the rebuke right there. They had nothing to say. There was nothing to say. In other words, you know what rebuke is? Rebuke is, there's two things. There's judgment and rebuke. Explain the commentaries. Judgment in our life is what we did versus what we didn't do. Did you give charity? Did you not give charity? Were you kind? Were you not kind? Rebuke is, were you consistent in your life? Just as Joseph says to his brothers, if you really care about Dad so much, what happened when it was my turn? What happened to your care about Dad? And that's what rebuke is. Hashem is going to ask us, okay, Jablon, you said you didn't have money to give charity to this organization when they asked you. Fine, accepted. But then how come you had money to blow on this stupid app that you didn't need? Okay? You said that you couldn't control your temper because, God, you give me a temper and therefore I lose it sometimes, right? How come when you're in front of your boss at work that you're able to control yourself? What changes? So that's what rebuke is. Rebuke is, are we consistent? And therefore, the Judaic standard of proof, the point at which Hashem expects us to say something is true, is the following formula. I'm going to say the formula and then we're going to develop it more. The point at which I would believe something in an area of my life in which I'm unbiased, meaning I don't care. If you tell me your sweater is black, I could care less. Nothing personal, okay? So, and there's a certain amount of proof that I need to believe your sweater is black. If it's visual proof, if it's sensual proof, empirical proof, and if that's enough for me, must be the same amount of proof you need in an area of your life in which you are biased. In other words, in areas where you don't want to believe, use the same standard and crush your biases. Don't let your biases get in the way. So, if for Mr. Descartes to cross the street, it's enough to say, my senses are telling me this car is coming. This car is coming. If that's enough that your senses are telling you the car is coming, then it should also be enough when you're looking at this world and you're looking at the human brain. That's enough proof to say your senses are telling you that there's some designer behind here. Use whatever your standard is, be consistent. It's not a number. It's not like when something's 98.5% proven, then you know it's true. It's not a number. It's something which is intimate. It's something where you know in your life at what point you act on something, when you have enough information to believe something. The Judaic standard is, okay, be consistent in all areas of your life. And don't let your biases make you see things and blind you to see things differently. As the Torah says about a judge, the Torah says you cannot bribe a judge. Why can't you bribe a judge? Because bribery blinds the eyes of the wise. It blinds their eyes. They don't see things straight anymore. Now, let's talk about what is knowledge. What is knowledge exactly? What point do you know something? So I'm going to go to another biblical source. This is early in the beginning of the Torah. And, okay, so this is probably familiar. It says, now the man knew his wife. Adam knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain. That's their first child. And she said, I have acquired a man with the Lord, and they continued to bear, etc., etc., etc. Okay. So, what is the Hebrew word for intimacy? The Hebrew word for intimacy is Yada. He knew his wife, and she conceived. I don't know any woman who conceived, but just somebody knowing that. So obviously, this is referring to an act of intimacy over here. That's a little strange, and throughout the Torah it uses the same word. I'm just giving you the first example. What does the word knowledge have to do with intimacy? They have nothing to do with each other. Why in biblical Hebrew, where Hashem is the author over here, who created the entire world, who created the Hebrew language to create the world, what is he telling us by saying knowledge and intimacy are the same Hebrew word? Why? And the answer is, because you know what knowledge is? When do you know something? Knowledge is something very intimate. It's something based on your experiences. I'm going to ask you something. You don't have to trust me on this. You can think about it the rest of your life. I've already spent much time thinking about this question, okay? Why is 2 + 2 4? Why? Why is that true? Only answer of why it's true is because experience has shown us in all of our lives that whenever you put 2 apples in a bucket and then you add another 2 apples, every single time we've tried it, we've arrived at 4. Knowledge is simply a product of what your experience has shown you. Now, anyone is welcome to email me now, in 5 years from now, in 20 years from now. You can call me in my nursing home and let me know that I thought about it. And one second, I have another reason why 2 + 2 is 4. I spent much time on this already. I have not come up with any other reason, but if you do, please let me know. Knowledge is experience. Every person has what their experience in their lives tell you. Now, most of our experience will overlap for 90% of the decisions we make. That means my experience tells me that a car coming at 50 miles an hour is dangerous to walk across the street. There's a chance I'm going to get hit. Probably everyone in this room, your experience tells you the same thing. For most things, our experience will overlap. But there are areas where our experience will not overlap, and that's okay. The Judaic standard of proof is, take your knowledge, take your experience, what your experience has shown you, and apply it without bias with the same standard everywhere. So if everything that you've ever seen in your life with design had a designer behind it, don't say that this world is an exception, because I wasn't there when the world was created, so I don't know. In any algebraic problem, when you have an algebra problem, right, you have 2 parts to the algebraic problem. You have the given and the unknown. The unknown is unknown. I don't know. You have to apply the given to the unknown. So what do I know about this table and this chair and this computer and this and my watch and the telephone? Every single one of them I know had somebody design it. So to say that I'm going to look at the world differently is not applying your standards of proof equally and fairly, because you wouldn't use that same standard when it comes to the watch and the table and the computer. So we have now a 2-part way to express what Hashem's standards of proof that he expects from us is. The first part is, look at what your experience has shown you. That's called knowledge. And then, take your knowledge from everything you've known and you've seen and you've been there for, and apply it without bias and be consistent in all areas of your life. That is the Judaic standard. Now, do we have a teacher in the room by any chance? Anyone teacher? Excellent. What's your name? Thank you. Can I ask you a question? What grade do you teach?
Well, I used to teach Spanish and also at a Jewish school in Argentina, where originally it was 6th grade.
Okay. So I'm going to pose this question to you.
I'm not teaching now.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. I'm going to pose a question to you. What would you do in the following case? Pretend that you're a kindergarten teacher, and you're teaching basic arithmetic. And so you show your students the following lesson, okay? You show them that you take 2 apples, you throw it in a bucket, you take another 2 apples, and you throw it in a bucket, and you take the bucket around the class, and you show everyone how many do we have? We get 4. And then you show them the same thing with bananas. 2 bananas and 2 bananas, and you still get 4. Now it's time for the test, as we call it in Poznak. It's the summative time. Okay? It's time for the summative. And you pass out a summative, and on your test, you say, what would happen if you put 2 shoes in a bucket and then another 2 shoes? And little Mary raises her hand, and she says, this is not a fair test, because you never told us that. What would you say? I like light.
Well, the scenario is the same, you're just changing the example.
That's right. Exactly.
So is it
That's hard to explain to a kindergarten teacher kid, but in some form or another, you're going to say that. In other words, all disciplines of knowledge expect consistency and that things won't break down. You don't assume that when you throw sneakers into the bucket, it's going to break down, unless there's a reason for it to break down. So, for example, if you're throwing in, little pieces of tissue or something into the bucket, which can crumble, then that's a reason to differentiate. Maybe it'll turn into 100 pieces inside. But if there's no reason to differentiate, then all disciplines in life expect consistency. When your doctor writes you a prescription, your doctor is saying, I assume that all the knowledge that we've had from science and medicine until now will apply. I'm not going to assume it's going to break down right now, because I expect consistency. In science, in psychology, mathematics, of course, medicine, every single area we expect. When I pick up my foot to put it down on the floor, I'm expecting there's going to be gravity because there was gravity a second ago. I'm expecting there's going to be gravity now. So therefore, that is knowledge. Knowledge is apply what you know, what's intimate inside of you, apply it, and apply it consistently. So if a kid tells me in that example, well, you never taught us shoes, then I would tell the kid, well, you know what, you're not using knowledge. You're working outside of the world of knowledge. Knowledge assumes that there's rules in the world, that things actually work. If you want to work outside of knowledge, then okay, but we're working with knowledge over here. Now, which leads me to the next point, which is the following. What about if I have a Descartesianist, somebody who says, well, everything's a fluke, your sweater's pink. But what if they really would cross the street? What if they really are consistent? What do you do with that student? They say, I don't believe the car's there, and they would cross the street. What do you do with that kid? What does Hashem expect to give mitzvot to people? If a person could say, Hashem, you've proven nothing, okay? All the rules of logic say that there's a God here, but I'm going to work outside of that. I'm going to go with the fluke. And in all areas of my life, Hashem, I'm going to be consistently going with the fluke. I'm going to cross the street when that car's coming at 50 miles an hour. Okay? And they're texting. Go down Sterling Road. All these teenagers are texting. It's unbelievable. I stay far away from teenagers if I can. Okay. They just made it, illegal. You get a ticket with texting. They're still texting. But anyway, we put that aside. So what if the guy really is consistent? Then what do you tell that person? How does Hashem expect a person to come up with conclusions and truths and realities? What do they tell? What would he say? So the answer is that you're right. That person is absolutely not obligated in mitzvot, because they can't be obligated in mitzvot, because they think outside of the world of knowledge. Let me read to you. There's something called in Jewish law. I put 3 different Mishnahs. Mishnah is a body of law. I put them over here. There's something called a shotat. Now, I don't know exactly how you say shotat in modern Hebrew. It's an imbecile or something like that. A shotat is somebody who acts in a crazy manner, and they think outside of reality, and the Talmud gives certain signs of how you could tell somebody is a shotat. And look what it says about them. A shotat, if you get into a fight with a shotat, it's unfortunate. One who injures them is liable. If they injure others, they're exempt. They're not obligated to mitzvot. They're not held to pay for they're not responsible. Okay? A minor and a shotat are not fit to vow. Their vows, their promises, all the different laws of making vows on things do not apply to them. And the bottom example is about their kosher meat. If they are a slaughterer, they're not able to do that, etc. A shotah, somebody who really believes outside of reality, they don't have a grasp on reality. You're right, they're not obligated in mitzvot. So can I tell Hashem, but I was a shotah, so I'm good, right? Well, were you consistently a shotah? Did you cross in front of the car? No? Then don't fake. Don't try to fake me out. It doesn't work that way. Now, I've researched the concept of shotah very well, very thoroughly, because for personal reasons, okay, I have a child who is mentally handicapped, okay. It's very clear in the halachic writings. Halachic writings are Jewish law. It's very clear a shotah has nothing to do with mental capacity. Nothing to do with mental capacity. My child is going to be obligated in every mitzvah that he's able to do. Whatever he can do, he can do. A shotah is somebody who's detached from reality. This is a guy who would walk in front of a car. It has nothing to do with how smart he is. This is a guy, one of the examples of the Talmud is you give him a present, you give him a shirt, and he rips it because he doesn't understand things of value. So such a person, you're right, you can't obligate them in mitzvot. They'll tell you, 100%. 100%. Now, I want to share with you something which ties right into this idea. There was a rabbi who lived before the war, and his name was Rabbi Wasserman. And he was the dean of a yeshiva in a city called Baranovich. And he wrote books on the Talmud. People who study the Talmud, a lot of them study his books. He was fundraising in America before the war. And everybody told him, don't go back, you're crazy, don't go back. And he says, I know exactly what's going to happen, but I'm going back. I'm going back because I'm not going to leave my students without me. And he went back. He and his entire yeshiva were massacred and killed during their studies, with the exception of one student who hid, and that student is the one who wrote the foreword about the whole story in one of his books. So, just so you should know who we're talking about right now. I'm going to share with you the main ideas he says in his most famous essay. Now, this is not a Talmudic work. He also has a book which is about Jewish thought. And it's called his Essay on Faith. Now, there are 613 mitzvot in the Torah. The trick is to find what they are, because the Torah doesn't give you a number. Oh, here's 1, here's 2, here's 3. It doesn't work that way. You have to find what they are. Usually, of course, you're looking for a verb. There's exceptions. Okay. So, Maimonides makes a list of the 613 mitzvot. He's not the only one. There are several people who make lists, and they don't always reach the same conclusions. But Maimonides says, but there has to be 613. Everybody agrees on that because the Talmud says so. Maimonides says he counts as his first mitzvah, the mitzvah of having faith. And where does it tell me to have faith? It's the faith in God. It tells me to have faith in the first of the 10 commandments. I am the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. Thank you very much. Why are you telling me that? In other words, acknowledge my existence. That's the mitzvah of faith. And Rabbi Wasserman asks 3 philosophical questions on this. How can faith be a mitzvah? How can faith be a commandment? How can you command it? And he asks the following 3 questions. Question number 1. You can't command an emotion. You can't command somebody to believe something. You believe or you don't believe. So how do you command such a thing? Tell you, I want you all to believe in the boogeyman. Great. Now, do you believe in him? The second question he asks is, who would the Torah be talking to if it's commanding faith? Because there's 2 groups of people. There's believers and non-believers. Now, when the Torah says sit in a sukkah, it's talking to the believers, obviously, because those who don't believe in God are not going to believe that God commanded it. And the Torah says, I want you to have a Passover Seder, tell over the story of Egypt. It's talking to the believers. But to tell me to have faith, who is it talking to? The believer already believes. You don't need to tell him or her to have faith. And the non-believer doesn't believe that God ever commanded it in the first place. So who would God possibly be talking to? There's no audience for this mitzvah. There's no audience for this command. That's his second question. And his third question is, I'm sorry, I like light. I apologize about your eyes. Okay. The third question he asks is, let's say it's a mitzvah, which Maimonides says it is. So that means, at what age does somebody become obligated in that mitzvah? What age? Bar bat mitzvah, right? So for a girl at 12 years old and a boy at 13 years old, because girls mature faster and boys sometimes never mature, sometimes they mature at 13. Okay. So he says, are you kidding me? You expect a 12-year-old girl, 13-year-old boy, to come up with the logic to arrive at the conclusion that there's a God in this world? There have been geniuses who died agnostic. What do you expect from a 12-year-old? How could the Torah command such a thing? Those are his questions. And he says the following to respond to it. He says that deep down inside, everybody is a believer. Everybody's a believer. Because if you would take out a book from the shelf and you would show it to even a 7-year-old and you would say, did this book come about by itself or did the ink just spill over? Every 7-year-old would say, clearly somebody authored it. Because their experiences in life, as we've mentioned, point them in that direction. Whenever there's something with design, somebody had to design it. That's what they're saying. Every 7-year-old will say somebody wrote that book. His specific example is a water wheel. Okay, fine. A watch, right? If you tell me, how did this watch come about? A 7-year-old will say somebody made it. Why does the 7-year-old say somebody made it? Because they're using their algebraic expression right now. I use the knowledge that I have to apply to what I don't have. I don't know what happened if this watch was made, but everything that I've seen in my life that had design, somebody made it. Even breakfast this morning. Somebody made my breakfast. So everyone naturally, when they look at this world, they say somebody had to design this. It's natural, like you look at any building. What's causing these geniuses to be agnostic on it? What's really behind it is their biases. Their Their bias is telling them, don't look in the same way you look at other things. Pick a fluke. Find a fluke. Find a fluke to say, well, it's possible if you do this and this and this, and you give enough time, this whole beautiful world came about randomly. So he says it's really their biases which are causing them to say that. So, and that's why he says, when the Torah says not to give a bribe to a judge, as I mentioned before, even the greatest person, the greatest righteous person, Moshe Rabbeinu, the Torah says you can't give Moshe Rabbeinu 5 cents, a nickel, to judge a case, because even he is subject to bias and could rule unfavorably because of that nickel that he got. So therefore, when the Torah is speaking to say to have faith, who is it talking to? It's talking to everybody. Everybody naturally believes. The mitzvah is not to have the knowledge of God. The mitzvah is to acknowledge what you already know. And how do you acknowledge what you already know? Squelch your biases. That is what the command is telling me to do, to squelch your biases. So to answer all the questions, he says it's talking to everybody. Everybody naturally believes. And how do you command a 12-year-old? Well, you could command a 6-year-old to say, a 6-year-old knows somebody made this room. Somebody made that video camera. As a matter of fact, he says when the Torah speaks about heresy, about not believing in God, the words the Torah uses in the Shema, we say, "V'lo taturu acharei levavchem." Don't follow after your heart to go leave God. That's what the Torah says in the Shema. It says, why does the Torah say don't follow after your heart? Why doesn't it say don't follow after your brain? Aren't you coming to conclusions with your brain? He says the answer is because if you really used your brain without your heart, you'd always arrive at the conclusion that there's a God to this world. It's the heart. What does the heart always represent? Emotions, what I want, desire. It's the heart which clouds you. It's the heart which is clouding the brain. But if you only strictly use the brain, it would always arrive at the same conclusion. So to sum up what we did today, and there's a lot more to do, but I think we're good. To sum up what we did today, in order to teach anything from one person to another, you need a common standard or you're not speaking the same language. There are many different standards out there. You could go research standards, you'll find many standards. However, if you take even the most extreme standard, most people will only use it sometimes when they wish to, and not when they don't wish to. And that's called, it's their bias, making them see one thing one way and seeing something else another way. And what Hashem expects from us, and what I tell my students is, I don't force anyone to believe anything in my class, never. If I force anyone to believe, I would lose all credibility with my students. I don't cram anything down their throats. But I said, at least look at it through the prism of be consistent in the way you normally look at things in which you're unbiased. And use the same consistent standard in all areas of your life. Hold on here. Aaron? Yeah. You're done. You stopped already?
No, I haven't.
Okay. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
If there's questions, I can stay for a few minutes, please. Thank you. Any questions, or we're good?
Time for all the questions.